those Bitcoin miners basically up sticks and move to other more welcoming jurisdictions. And I think there will always be those other jurisdictions that are willing to welcome this part of the industry. And indeed, I mean, we're seeing this in parts of the states as well, because certain US states, namely, I think Texas is the best example, are saying, well, hang on, these guys are, okay, these guys use a lot of energy, but they are producing something tangibly useful, so let's attract them. Let's attract them and their capital. So I think, we will see, if the EU does crack down on proof of work, then we'll see those miners migrate elsewhere. And I think, obviously, Europe's energy problems at the moment are more pronounced, really, than anywhere else. So part of me does wonder, really, whether MICA, whether any EU legislation is going to make any difference. Already that process has started. Anyone still mining crypto in Europe is naturally going to be looking elsewhere.
Sticking with the regulation theme, before we get into the energy crisis, which is again another topic you've discussed at length. This is the challenge with you, Guy. You touch on so many interesting topics, it's hard to narrow down which one to focus on. But let's go with a broader theme of regulation for now. We do have the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, issuing a report on cryptocurrencies, on global regulation of cryptocurrencies. What was your main takeaway from the IMF report in terms of what it can mean for the crypto market?
I think the main takeaway was the attitude of these large international unaccountable organizations. It basically remains the same. It remains to be, how can we just regulate this? How can we, quote unquote, protect investors, all that sort of stuff, without giving, I think, enough thought to how can we meet in the middle? How can we regulate but also encourage this industry to grow? Is the real incentive to protect individuals? Do you think that that's the real motive, or is that just the pretext? I think the real incentive is to figure out how they can tax this industry, how they can extract the most money from it. And I just don't think that we've seen the right sort of moves to protect investors from anyone. They never seem to be picking the right targets. It's always it might be the SEC going after someone high profile like Kim Kardashian or anything like that. I think what needs to be done more is to crack down on these Ponzi scheme projects themselves. But we just don't see any kind of joined up thinking there. Do you see a potential crash in the cryptocurrency sector, or a bear market as we're in right now, as serving as a pretext for the IMF to come in with stronger regulation? Is that laying the groundwork for stronger intervention, which may not necessarily be in the greater interest of the cryptocurrency market at large? Absolutely, absolutely. We had a taste of it when Terra collapsed a few months ago, and obviously that was terrible for a lot of investors. But yeah, that was certainly, I think, gave a sense that these wider organizations, they are waiting for the next crash, because as you say, that does serve as an excellent pretext, and go, oh well, people are losing money on crypto, therefore we have to stop it, without looking at any sort of longer term picture. The idea of regulation has always hovered as an existential threat to cryptocurrencies, especially to Bitcoin, and that may be the biggest challenge to a fiat currency standard, many would say. Where are we in terms of the level of threat that regulation poses? Is there anything that you see derailing the cryptocurrency market where we are now? I think there are perhaps two main possible, I guess you'd call sort of black swans for the crypto market in that sense. I think one is if the internet was to be shut down, which I think is hopefully fairly unlikely. I know we've got a lot of power outages out there. But there certainly are. We can't rule anything out. I think the other threat is coordinated global legislation, and I think again this is what worries me about organizations like the IMF. Right. They have influence in so many different jurisdictions, and they are, I think they are often able to provide the links between them. However, that said, I think the chances of any sort of global standard of regulations, I think that is pretty unlikely, because I think the world is becoming so much more polarized now, and I think the Russia invading Ukraine is a great example. We are seeing very much a split between East and West, and I think that split is and I think it'll also widen as well between the so-called developed world and developing world as well. I think we are going to see more polarization between countries and between regions. And I think that is going to make it very difficult for any sort of global standard of regulation to come into being.
Yeah, we definitely are seeing the bifurcation of the global monetary system, to your point. So you're feeling safe in saying you do not foresee Bitcoin ever going to zero?
I am happy to say 100% that I don't think Bitcoin will ever go to zero. I think Bitcoin still has a lot of challenges ahead of it. I think the crypto sector as a whole has a lot of challenges ahead of it. And I do believe that there are lots of organizations out there, like the IMF, like the Bank for International Settlements, like the Financial Action Task Force, that do actively want to destroy the industry. And that does trouble me. But if we're talking about Bitcoin itself, the rabbit is out of the hat, if you like. The genie is out of the bottle, maybe a better analogy. But yes, and that's what for me is so fascinating about it. This is something that's out in the world. It's beyond the reach of governments, and I do get the sense that governments are beginning to accept that now. We're hearing kind of less of this sort of rhetoric. We're hearing less of people saying, "Oh, well, we need to turn off the blockchain," and things like that, because I think they're starting to realize that you can't just turn off the Bitcoin blockchain. You can't just stop this thing that's in motion. But yeah, there are still challenges, certainly.
How much of a challenge do you see worldwide adoption of central bank digital currencies to Bitcoin?
Again, I think that's a threat, and I think obviously that is something, it's viewed the other way around. The central banks themselves, that is why I think they view crypto as such a threat, because this is their eventual end game. I do think as well it could, from the research that my team and I have done, the chances of your average person, your average population, say, in any given country, actually voluntarily adopting a CBDC is very, very low. And I think this is something that crypto taps into so well. This growing distrust of the fiat financial system, this growing sense, post 2008, that banks can't be trusted. And so people, I think, are more and more waking up to the idea that they need to take responsibility for their own finances. This being, this banking yourself, and crypto is such a big part of that. But certainly, yeah, CBDCs are going to, once they start being rolled out en masse, that's certainly going to change the landscape in how that Bitcoin and other cryptos operate.
And that brings us to the global reset, where CBDCs are going to play a very big role. For our viewers that are not familiar with the global reset, conceptually, what is it?
So this is this idea that the IMF, the World Economic Forum, again, these organizations, these
unelected bodies, these bodies that are not accountable to anyone.
Yeah, I wonder how many viewers out there can name, any more than one or two members of the IMF or the World Economic Forum. These are very shadowy people, but obviously they are hand in hand with major global corporations across the world. These so-called stakeholders. And the Great Reset is very much about this idea of how this kind of stakeholder capitalism can take root, can almost going kind of beyond borders and stuff. And a lot of it is about control and surveillance. And again, this is where CBDCs come in. This idea of being able to see what people are spending, when they're spending, what they're spending it on, and even put limits on those things, which for me is one of the scariest parts of it. There's also, I think there's a growing realization from companies and also from governments as well, that especially in developed countries, there is an enormous demographic decline going on. And I mean, we could talk about the reasons for that for hours on end. But I think what that essentially means is that there are, over time, going to be fewer and fewer consumers. So the problem for World Economic Forum stakeholders and people like that, how do we continue this growth cycle? How do we continue to grow the economy? How do we continue to sell stuff to people? And when we were researching this video on the Great Reset, one of the things that really struck me was this idea of basically hardware as a service. So rather than you going out and buying a new phone, say, you'd simply rent it. You'd pay a subscription, a bit like you do with your Netflix or your Amazon Prime or whatever it may be. You would pay a subscription, a monthly subscription, and whenever your phone became obsolete, whenever there was a new model that the company wanted to put out, you'd send your old one back and they'd just replace it. And that way, they're able to lock in a consumer for life. But the problem is, as this kind of infamous saying goes, you'll own nothing.
Yeah, and be happy. You'll own nothing and be happy. So what is then, would you say, the end game of the global reset, of the great global reset?
The great global reset. I think the end game is control. I think the end game is governments and corporations being able to...
To what end? Control to what end?
I think control to influence how we live our lives, influence how we spend, where we spend. Again, it seems to me to be this, and again, this idea of constant growth, this constant inflation. And this is something, again, that I've talked about more recently, this idea, inflation is one of the most destructive forces really on the planet. It's kind of the root cause of so many of the problems that we feel: overconsumption, environmental degradation, no upward mobility, increased inequality. All these sorts of problems, I think, can very much be traced back to this idea of inflation, which itself comes from this constant desire to grow. Quite possibly. I think that is a very likely scenario. And there is this sense, isn't there? There is this sense that we're kind of teetering on a precipice.
We do get that sense, yeah.
I really do, and it's hard because I sometimes feel like I'm in my own sort of echo chamber, kind of talking about this. And I have all the sources that I go to across the internet for to find this information, and people I watch and learn from and all this sort of stuff. But there does seem to be the sense that a really bad global recession, and I mean in some parts of the world that is already the case. But I think it's very hard for me to see how we're able to enter a new cycle of growth, how things are supposed to go back up again without going down further. I think there is a bottom, and we kind of need to see it.
Well, that is the natural economic cycle, right?
Yes.
And even in nature, you have to destroy things, burn things down for them to sprout again. Speaking of echo chambers that you're listening to, what has been your main takeaway from the summit here in Dubai?
I think the main takeaway is just the level of excitement and the level of innovation going on around the blockchain and crypto space. General interest in crypto is so low at the moment. If you look at Google search trends, anything like that, people in general just aren't interested. And I guess that's understandable because so many people are underwater, or so the crypto prices aren't doing anything dramatic. But what I get from the sense from here is that isn't as important as people would think. What's really important is all the building that's going on behind the scenes. There are still projects launching, there are projects still developing, going along with their roadmaps, recruiting team members. Everyone is looking to grow, and that, I think, that is partly because places like Dubai are making such efforts to attract this industry, and it gives me a lot of hope, because I think when things do eventually get better, when the next bull market comes around, for instance, those projects are going to have been built today.
And speaking of Dubai attracting great things and great people, again, You've moved to Dubai. Coin Bureau is moving its headquarters to Dubai. Tell us about that quickly and what we can expect in the future from Coin Bureau.
Coin Bureau we're looking to expand. We not only want to grow as a YouTube channel, we don't just want to reach more people, but we want to widen the team as well, so as we can expand the scope of our research. We're also expanding the scope of our business as well. We have a recruitment arm now, we have an events arm, we're looking to move into consulting, various other aspects of the industry, because we want to cement ourselves as a force in this industry and as a force for good in this industry, obviously. So it feels like Dubai is a place where we can do that, where we can grow, where we can attract talent. And also it's a way of bringing together our team that is very much spread out all over the world. We have people based in Europe, we've got people based in North America, in Asia, in South Africa, people all over the world. And this seems like the place to try and bring them together, so as we can exchange ideas, so as we can be in closer, better communication with each other, and grow Coin and basically fulfill the potential that we think Coin Bureau has.